Before we dive deeper into Martha's incredible journey of revenge, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that actions have consequences and that family betrayal deserves justice, hit that like button right now. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Ring the notification bell because, trust me, you're going to want to see how Martha turns the tables on her ungrateful family. And here's what I really want to know. Drop a comment below and tell me, if your own family tried to secretly ship you off to a nursing home, would you forgive them or would you make them pay? Because Martha's about to show us exactly what calculated revenge looks like, and it's going to be absolutely devastating. Now, let's see how a brilliant woman with $22 million and nothing left to lose destroys the people who tried to throw her away. My name is Martha Benjamin, and at 57, I thought I had seen the worst of human nature. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in October when my world tilted on its axis. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn, painting my garden in shades of amber and gold. I had been living with my son David and his wife Jessica for 6 months, helping them through what they called a rough patch. They had moved into my sprawling Victorian home in Charleston after David's business venture failed, bringing along my precious 7-year-old grandson, Tommy. I was in the kitchen, preparing Tommy's favorite pancakes, humming an old jazz tune when I felt small arms wrap around my legs. Looking down, I saw Tommy's usually bright blue eyes filled with tears. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice trembling, "you need to leave now." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He glanced toward the staircase where his parents' voices carried down, then pressed closer to me. "My parents are sending you to a nursing home today. I heard them on the phone. They said the van is coming this afternoon." The wooden spoon fell from my hand, clattering against the marble countertop. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The child I had raised when his mother was too busy with her social climbing, the son I had supported through every failure and mistake, was about to throw me away like yesterday's newspaper. "Are you sure, Tommy?" I asked, kneeling to his level. He nodded, tears spilling over. "Daddy said you're getting too old and that you might forget things. But Grandma, you remember everything. You remembered my birthday and that I don't like pickles on my sandwiches and that I'm scared of the dark." My heart shattered and hardened simultaneously. I had been living in their home for 6 months, cooking, cleaning, helping with Tommy, and paying for groceries with my own money. What they didn't know, what I had never told them, was about the $22 million sitting in various accounts and investments, accumulated over decades of smart business decisions and careful savings. David thought his late father had left me comfortable, but not wealthy. He had no idea that I had built my own empire while married to his father, starting with a small catering business that grew into a restaurant chain I'd sold for millions. I had kept quiet about my true wealth, wanting to see the real character of my family when they thought I had little to give. Now I knew. "Tommy," I said softly, wiping his tears, "I need you to do something for me. Go to your room and play with your Legos. Don't tell your parents we talked, okay?" He nodded solemnly. "Will I see you again, Grandma?" I kissed his forehead. "Sweetheart, you'll see me sooner than anyone expects." As Tommy disappeared upstairs, I moved through my own home like a ghost. In my bedroom, the one that used to be the guest room because David and Jessica had claimed the master suite, I quietly gathered a few essentials. Not luggage, nothing that would signal my intentions. Just my purse, containing my identification, credit cards, and the business card of my attorney, Robert Thornfield. I could hear them now, David and Jessica, talking in hushed tones in what used to be my study. They thought I was losing my hearing along with everything else. "The facility said they can take her this afternoon," Jessica was saying. "It's perfect timing since she's in the kitchen. We can have everything packed and ready." "I feel bad about this," David said, though his voice lacked conviction. "But she's becoming a burden, Jess. And Honestly, we need the house. Once she's gone, we can finally renovate properly. Don't feel guilty, Jessica replied smoothly. She'll be better cared for there. Besides, we both know she doesn't have much money left. At least this way, we won't have to support her in her old age. If only they knew they were talking about a woman who owned 3 properties outright, had investments that generated 6-figure annual returns, and enough liquid assets to buy their precious facility 10 times over. I slipped out through the garden door, leaving behind the house that had been in my family for 3 generations. The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted to put me in a home, not knowing they were living in mine. As I walked toward the street, my phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Martha, the papers you requested are ready. The trust structure you designed is quite creative. When should we proceed? I smiled for the first time in hours. The wheels were already in motion. I had contacted Robert 3 weeks ago when I first overheard them discussing my situation. I hadn't known the extent of their betrayal then, but a lifetime of experience had taught me to prepare for the worst in people. I flagged down a taxi and gave the driver the address of the Magnolia Hotel downtown. As the car pulled away from my home, I turned back for one last look. Tommy was at his bedroom window, pressing his little hand against the glass. My heart ached for him, but I knew what I had to do. My son and daughter-in-law thought they were sending me away. They had no idea I had just begun my return. They think they're getting rid of me, I whispered to my reflection in the taxi window. They have no idea they've just unleashed me. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Like this video if you're ready to see how Martha turns the tables on her ungrateful family, and comment below with your thoughts on what you would do in her situation. Would you forgive or would you fight back? Let me know, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you're first to see how this story unfolds. The next morning brought unseasonably warm weather and the first phase of my resurrection as someone else entirely. I met Margaret Thorne at a quiet cafe in the French Quarter, far from any place David and Jessica might frequent. Margaret was exactly what I had hoped for, sharp-eyed, professional, and entirely without judgment. She studied the photographs I provided with the clinical interest of a scientist. "Your son and daughter-in-law," she said, not a question but a statement. "You want full surveillance. Financial, social, personal communications?" "Everything," I confirmed. "I want to know what they eat for breakfast, what they watch on television, who they call when they think no one is listening." She nodded, making notes on a tablet. "Timeline? Indefinite. This is a long-term project. Budget?" I slid an envelope across the table. "There's $50,000 in cash. If you need more, you have my number." Her eyebrows raised slightly, the only emotion she showed. "What exactly are we documenting, Mrs. Sinclair?" I smiled. "Justice." After leaving Margaret, I drove to a small coastal town 2 hours from Charleston. Beaufort had always held a special place in my heart. It was where my late husband had proposed 35 years ago. The town was small enough that I could blend in, but sophisticated enough that a woman of means wouldn't stand out. I rented a charming cottage on the waterfront under the name Margaret Sinclair, paying 6 months in advance. The landlord, a kind elderly man named Henry Morrison, helped me move in my few belongings. "Running away from something?" he asked with a knowing smile as we arranged furniture. "Running toward something," I corrected. "Sometimes they're the same thing." By evening, I had established my new life. Margaret Sinclair was a recently widowed woman who had moved to Beaufort for peace and quiet. She was friendly but private, generous but not flashy. She volunteered at the local library and donated anonymously to the church. In every way, she was the woman Martha Benjamin had always wanted to be, free. My first surveillance report from Margaret Thorne arrived via encrypted email that night. The contents made my blood boil. Day 1 report, David and Jessica Benjamin. 10:30 a.m. Subjects discovered Target's absence. Jessica appeared distressed. David seemed more annoyed than concerned. 11:15 a.m. Sunset Manor transport arrived. Subjects argued with staff, claiming Target had wandered off. Staff left after payment dispute. 12 p.m. David began searching Target's room. Removed jewelry box, several pieces of artwork, and documents. 2:30 p.m. Jessica called her sister, overheard saying, "The old bat disappeared just when we needed her gone. We can't wait much longer to put the house on the market." 4:45 p.m. David visited Wells Fargo Bank, inquired about Target's accounts. Manager informed him he wasn't authorized to access information. 6:20 p.m. Subjects ordered pizza for dinner. Tommy appeared to be crying. Parents ignored him. 8 p.m. Overheard Jessica on phone with unidentified male. "If she's dead, we inherit everything. If she's alive, she's a problem. Either way, we need to act fast." End day 1 report. I read the report 3 times, my hands shaking with rage. They weren't even pretending to mourn my absence. They were treating it as a minor inconvenience in their grand plan to steal my life. The next morning, I met with Robert at his law office. He had prepared the death certificate, signed by a doctor who owed him several favors and backdated by 2 days. In the eyes of the law, Martha Benjamin had died of a heart attack in her sleep while visiting a friend in Savannah. The friend, conveniently, was traveling abroad and couldn't be reached for comment. "The funeral arrangement will be handled by Seaside Memorial Services," Robert explained. "Closed casket, of course. The service will be tomorrow at 2 p.m. I've already notified your family. Will they attend?" "Oh, they'll attend. I mentioned the reading of the will would follow the service. Nothing motivates grief quite like the promise of inheritance." I laughed, but it was a cold sound. "And the retirement facility?" "Construction begins Monday. I've acquired a beautiful property in Mount Pleasant, close enough that they can't claim distance as an excuse, isolated enough that their situation won't be widely observed. The architect has your specifications, and I've hired the best contractors money can buy." "How long until completion?" 6 months, perhaps 7.
Don't worry, Martha.
I'll make sure they're kept busy in the meantime with legal proceedings and trust documentation. By the time they're required to report for duty, they'll be desperate enough to agree to anything. That afternoon, I attended my own funeral from the back row, wearing a black wig and oversized sunglasses. The turnout was pathetic. Maybe 30 people, most of whom I didn't recognize. David wore an expensive black suit I had never seen before, purchased, no doubt, with money he thought belonged to him now. Jessica had the audacity to wear a dress I recognized from my own closet. But it was Tommy who broke my heart. He sat between his parents, tears streaming down his face, clutching a drawing he had made for me. I could see it was a picture of the 2 of us in my garden, with the words, "I love you, Grandma," written in his careful 7-year-old handwriting. The pastor spoke about my generosity and kindness, words that felt like ash in my mouth as I watched David check his watch repeatedly. They couldn't wait for this charade to end so they could claim their prize. After the service, everyone gathered at Robert's office for the reading of the will. I watched from a cafe across the street as David and Jessica practically skipped up the steps, their grief forgotten in their eagerness for wealth. 20 minutes later, they emerged looking stunned. I could see Jessica's mouth moving rapidly, probably complaining about the conditions of the trust. David's face was red with anger or frustration, possibly both. That evening, Margaret's report confirmed what I had observed. Subjects attended funeral and will reading. Upon learning of trust conditions, Jessica was overheard saying, $22 million? Where did she get that kind of money? David replied, I don't care where it came from. We'll do whatever we have to do to get it. Current status. Subjects appear to be planning acceptance of trust conditions.
Perfect.
They had taken the bait. Now all I had to do was build the perfect trap. 6 months of exile had transformed me in ways I hadn't expected. Living as Margaret Sinclair in Beaufort, I discovered parts of myself that Martha Benjamin had never been allowed to explore. I learned to paint watercolors at the community center, took long walks on the beach at sunrise, and for the first time in decades, I slept peacefully through the night. But my peace was carefully constructed around a foundation of cold, calculated revenge. The surveillance reports from Margaret Thorne had provided a complete picture of David and Jessica's true characters. They had moved completely into my house within a week of the funeral, redecorating my bedroom and throwing away my personal belongings. They had attempted to sell my jewelry, only to discover I had replaced it with high-quality replicas years ago. The real pieces were safely stored in a vault. Most heartbreakingly, they had enrolled Tommy in a boarding school 2 hours away, claiming they needed space to grieve. The truth, captured on audio by Margaret's sophisticated equipment, was that they wanted him gone so they could focus on securing their inheritance without the burden of actual parenting. Now, as I stood on the construction site of Restful Acres Retirement Community, I felt the first stirrings of satisfaction. The facility was everything I had envisioned, beautiful on the surface, restrictive underneath. The residential quarters are nearly complete, the contractor, James Mitchell, reported as we walked through the main building. Each room meets your specifications, comfortable but basic furniture, no luxury amenities, and the monitoring systems you requested are fully integrated. I nodded approvingly. The monitoring systems were actually a comprehensive surveillance network that would track every movement my son and daughter-in-law made once they began their sentence. Nothing would happen without my knowledge. And the staff quarters? I asked. Your private wing is magnificent, ma'am. Completely separate entrance, soundproof walls, and the view of the gardens is spectacular. Your employees won't even know you're on the premises. Perfect. I would be living literally above them while they serve their time, watching their every move, controlling their every day. Robert joined us for the final walkthrough. At 72, he was still sharp as a razor and seemed to be enjoying our elaborate revenge plot as much as I was. The employment contracts are ready, he said, handing me a thick folder. 10 years of service, minimum 40 hours per week, no vacation for the first 2 years, and strict behavioral guidelines. Any violation of the rules results in immediate termination and forfeiture of the inheritance. I flipped through the pages, noting the details we had crafted together. David and Jessica would be required to wake at 5 a.m., work until 8 p.m. with only brief breaks, and live in small, basic rooms on the premises. They could leave on Sundays for exactly 6 hours, and they had to be back by 8 p.m. or face penalties. What about Tommy? I asked. He'll be allowed to visit on weekends, supervised by the facility staff. However, if his parents break any rules during his visits, those privileges will be revoked. It was cruel, but necessary. I needed to see my grandson, but I also needed David and Jessica to understand that their actions had consequences. The first residents began arriving 2 weeks before David and Jessica were scheduled to start. I had carefully selected them. Elderly individuals who genuinely needed care, but were also strong personalities who wouldn't be easily manipulated. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, a former federal judge. Mr. Theodore King, a retired Marine colonel. Mrs. Patricia Williams, a former CEO who took no nonsense from anyone. I introduced myself as Margaret Sinclair, the facility's director and benefactor. To them, I was simply a generous woman who wanted to create a better environment for senior care. They had no idea they were about to become unwitting participants in the most elaborate revenge plot ever conceived. 2 days before David and Jessica were scheduled to begin their employment, I received a final surveillance report that nearly made me laugh out loud. Subjects spent considerable time researching easy elderly care jobs online. Jessica purchased several books on managing senior citizens and making friends with old people. David bought expensive, comfortable shoes and ergonomic back support, apparently believing the work would be light and pleasant. Overheard Jessica telling her friend, "It's basically babysitting for 10 years. How hard could it be? We just have to keep them fed and entertained, and we'll be millionaires." Current financial status. Subjects have spent their remaining savings on new wardrobes and furniture for their temporary situation. Credit card debt approaching $30,000. They thought they were going to be glorified babysitters for helpless old people. They were about to learn that the residents of Restful Acres were anything but helpless. On Sunday night, I received a call from Robert. "They're coming in tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. for orientation. Are you ready?" I looked out the window of my private suite at the grounds below, where David and Jessica would soon begin their new life. The irony was perfect. They had wanted to put me in a home, and now they would be living in one I controlled absolutely. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I said. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. I watched from my hidden office as David and Jessica's car pulled into the parking lot of Restful Acres at exactly 5:58 a.m. They looked nervous but optimistic, probably still believing they had found an easy path to wealth. They had no idea I was watching. The facility's entrance was designed to impress. Marble floors, fresh flowers, and classical music playing softly in the background. I had spared no expense in creating the illusion of luxury and ease. It was only after they signed their employment contracts that the reality would become apparent. At 6 a.m. sharp, they entered the main lobby where Patricia Williams, the facility's director of operations, waited for them. Patricia was a former CEO who I had hired specifically for this moment. At 68, she was sharp, no-nonsense, and completely immune to charm. Through my hidden cameras, I watched as David extended his hand with his most winning smile. "David Benjamin, and this is my wife, Jessica. We're here to begin our service." Patricia barely glanced at his hand. "You're 2 minutes late. In this facility, punctuality isn't optional. Follow me." Their smiles faltered as they followed her through a door marked "Staff Only." The corridor beyond was utilitarian. White walls, fluorescent lighting, and the antiseptic smell of institutional cleaning products. Gone was the elegant facade of the main lobby. "Your living quarters," Patricia announced, stopping in front of 2 small rooms. "Mr. Benjamin, you'll be in 147. Mrs. Benjamin, you're in 148. Jessica's voice carried clearly through the surveillance system. "Separate rooms? But we're married." Staff members are prohibited from sharing quarters. It maintains professional boundaries and ensures you're both fully committed to your duties rather than to each other. I watched David's face redden. "That seems excessive." "If you find the terms unacceptable, you're free to leave," Patricia said coolly. "Of course, leaving means forfeiting your inheritance entirely." They exchanged glances, and I could see them calculating. $22 million divided by 10 years of discomfort. The math was still in their favor. No, that's fine," Jessica said quickly. "We understand." "Good. Uniforms are in your rooms. Change and report to the main floor in 15 minutes. Your training begins immediately." As they separated to change, I switched camera views to watch their individual reactions. David stood in his tiny room, barely larger than a walk-in closet, and kicked the metal bed frame in frustration. Jessica opened her closet to find generic gray scrubs and comfortable shoes, her face twisting with disgust. 15 minutes later, they emerged looking deflated. The expensive clothes they had purchased were replaced with shapeless uniforms that stripped away every trace of vanity. Patricia led them to the dining hall, where 20 residents sat eating breakfast. Eleanor Hartwell, the former federal judge, looked up from her oatmeal with sharp eyes. "So, these are our new caretakers?" Eleanor said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. They look rather young and soft for this kind of work. Theodore King, the retired Marine colonel, grunted his agreement. Hope they're stronger than they appear. Mrs. Rodriguez needs help getting to the bathroom every 2 hours, and she weighs more than both of them combined. I watched Jessica's face pale as the reality began to sink in. This wasn't going to be the gentle babysitting job she had imagined. Your first task, Patricia announced, is to serve breakfast to everyone here, then clean the dining hall thoroughly. After that, you'll begin personal care duties. Mrs. Chun needs assistance with her bath, Mr. Morrison requires help with his medications, and Colonel King's physical therapy session needs supervision. For the next 8 hours, I watched my son and daughter-in-law discover what real work felt like. David struggled to lift residents from wheelchairs, his expensive back support proving useless when Mrs. Rodriguez needed help standing. Jessica's face went green when she had to change Mr. Peterson's adult diaper. By lunchtime, they were exhausted, sweaty, and beginning to snipe at each other. I can't believe your mother put us through this, Jessica hissed as she refilled water glasses.
She's dead, Jess.
This isn't her fault, isn't it? She could have just left us the money without all these ridiculous conditions. If only they knew how alive I was and how much I was enjoying their suffering. The afternoon brought new challenges. Patricia had arranged for several residents to be particularly demanding, not cruel, just appropriately needy. Eleanor required her medication at exact times and became imperious when David was 3 minutes late. Theodore insisted his physical therapy be done precisely according to his routine, correcting Jessica's form constantly. By dinner time, they were barely speaking to each other. At 8 p.m., Patricia dismissed them to their separate rooms. Lights out at 10 p.m., she announced. You'll be awakened at 5 a.m. for tomorrow's shift. Through the cameras, I watched them collapse onto their narrow beds, too exhausted even to complain. This was just day 1 of a 10-year sentence, and they were already breaking. But the best part came at 9 p.m. when my grandson Tommy called. I watched Jessica answer the phone in her room, her voice artificially bright.
Hey, on it.
How is school? Mom, when can I come visit? I miss you and Dad. Well, sweetheart, we're very busy right now. This new job is demanding. Maybe in a few weeks. But you promised I could visit every weekend. Jessica's mask slipped. Tommy, you need to understand that Mommy and Daddy are working very hard to secure your future. Sometimes that means sacrifices. I don't want a future without you and Dad. I just want to come home. This is home now, Jessica said, and I heard the exhaustion in her voice. At least for a while. After she hung up, I watched her cry, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her all day. Not for Tommy, but for herself and the life she thought she deserved. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled in to review the day's footage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of their character. And I would be watching every moment, the puppet master of their perfectly deserved fate. They had wanted to put me in a home. Now they were in mine, and I controlled everything. The game was just beginning. Are you invested in Martha's revenge? Hit that like button if you're rooting for her, and subscribe for more incredible stories of justice served cold. What do you think will break David and Jessica first, the hard work or the guilt? Drop your predictions in the comments below. Don't forget to share this story with someone who would appreciate seeing entitled people get what they deserve. 3 months into their sentence, David and Jessica had lost their shine entirely. I watched them through my cameras each morning, noting how their faces had hardened, how they moved with the exhausted shuffle of people pushed beyond their limits. The work was relentless by design. Every day brought 12 hours of physically demanding labor, lifting, cleaning, assisting with personal care, and enduring the sharp tongues of residents who saw right through their false cheerfulness. Eleanor Hartwell had become particularly skilled at exposing their selfishness. Just yesterday, I had watched her corner Jessica in the laundry room. You know, dear, Eleanor had said while folding towels with military precision, in my 40 years as a judge, I learned to recognize certain types of people. You and your husband? You're the type who've never had to work for anything real in your lives. Jessica had tried to protest, but Eleanor continued relentlessly. Don't misunderstand me. I don't judge you for that. Privilege isn't a crime. But the way you talk about this work like it's beneath you, like caring for elderly people, is some kind of punishment that tells me everything about your character. Through the hidden speakers, I had heard Jessica's voice crack slightly as she replied, We're just trying to fulfill our obligation. Obligation, Eleanor had repeated with disdain. Not calling, not compassion. Obligation. Tell me, what did you plan to do with your inheritance? Something noble, I assume? The silence that followed was answer enough. Now, as I reviewed the monthly reports, I saw the full scope of their deterioration. David had lost 20 pounds and developed a persistent cough from the stress. Jessica's hair had begun falling out, and she had started taking sleeping pills, which she had to hide since medication use by staff was strictly monitored. But the most satisfying part was watching their relationship crumble. This is your fault, Jessica had screamed at David just last week, unaware that their argument in the supply closet was being recorded. If you had been a better son, if you had actually cared about your mother instead of just her money, maybe she would have left us something without these insane conditions. My fault, David had shot back. You were the one pushing to get rid of her. You were the one who said she was becoming a burden. Because she was an old woman living in that huge house, hoarding money we could have been using. Using for what, Jessica? Your shopping sprees? Your spa days? Your complete inability to live within a budget. The argument had escalated until Patricia Williams arrived to remind them that personal disputes during work hours were violations of their contract. One more incident like that, and they would face disciplinary action. I had particularly enjoyed watching Jessica try to maintain her dignity while scrubbing toilets and emptying bedpans. The woman who had once spent $200 on a single facial was now working with her hands, her manicured nails broken and stained despite the industrial gloves. David fared no better. The man who had never held a job for more than 6 months was learning what it meant to show up every day, regardless of how he felt. When he tried to call in sick with a minor cold, Patricia had arrived at his room with a thermometer and a lecture about commitment. In this facility, she had said, we don't abandon our responsibilities because of minor discomfort. These residents depend on consistent care. If you can walk and talk, you can work. The residents themselves had become my greatest allies, though they didn't know it. Their demands weren't unreasonable, just constant and uncompromising. Mrs. Rodriguez needed help to the bathroom every 90 minutes like clockwork. Colonel King insisted his physical therapy be done precisely on schedule. Eleanor required her medications at exact times and became genuinely agitated when the routine was disrupted. But it was Tommy's weekend visits that provided the most delicious torture. My grandson had grown taller in the months since I had disappeared from his life, and sadder. He was withdrawn when he visited his parents, confused by their transformation from neglectful but comfortable providers to exhausted, irritable laborers. I watched from my hidden vantage point as he sat in the visiting room, trying to connect with 2 people who barely had the energy to speak to him. Mom, why do you look so tired all the time? He had asked Jessica during his last visit. Because Mommy is working very hard to make sure you have a good future, she had replied, but even a 7-year-old could hear the resentment in her voice. I don't need a good future, Tommy had said with the devastating honesty of childhood. I just need you to be happy again. Jessica had started crying then, right there in front of the other residents and their visiting families. David had to escort her outside to compose herself, leaving Tommy alone and confused. It was then that I made a decision that would change everything. I had been living as Margaret Sinclair, the mysterious benefactor who had funded the facility, but rarely appeared. The residents knew me as a kind woman who checked on their care occasionally, but I had maintained distance to protect my true identity. That afternoon, I walked into the visiting room where Tommy sat alone, coloring in a book while his parents argued outside. I approached slowly, my heart racing. "Hello there," I said softly, sitting across from him. "You must be Tommy." He looked up with those beautiful blue eyes that reminded me so much of his grandfather. "Yes, ma'am. Are you one of the people who live here?" "I help take care of this place," I said carefully. "I've heard about you from your parents. They talk about you quite a bit." His face brightened slightly. "They do?" "Oh, yes. Your father mentions how smart you are, and your mother says you're very kind to everyone you meet." It wasn't entirely a lie. They did mention him, usually in the context of how his boarding school fees were another financial burden they couldn't afford. "I miss them," Tommy said quietly. "They're different now. They used to be, I don't know, more fun? Now they're always tired and sad." My heart ached for him, but I pushed down the emotion. Sometimes adults have to do difficult things for important reasons. Your parents are working very hard here. But why? Grandma Martha left the money, right? Why can't they just use that and come home? The innocence of his question nearly broke my resolve. Here was the child I loved more than anything, suffering because of his parents' greed and my need for justice. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "getting something valuable requires proving you deserve it." David appeared in the doorway then, looking for Tommy. When he saw me talking to his son, his expression grew wary. "Tommy, come on. It's time to go." "This is Miss Margaret," Tommy said brightly. "She helps run this place." David forced a smile. "Thank you for keeping him company. Tommy, say goodbye." As they left, I watched David's face. There was something there, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or suspicion. I would have to be more careful. But seeing Tommy had reminded me why this was all necessary. My grandson deserved better than parents who saw him as an obligation. He deserved to understand that actions have consequences, that love isn't conditional on convenience. That night, I reviewed the surveillance footage from the day and noticed something interesting. After their argument, David and Jessica had returned to work with unusual intensity. Jessica had actually smiled while helping Mrs. Rodriguez with her dinner, and David had taken extra time to make sure Colonel King's physical therapy session was comfortable. Were they finally learning? Or were they simply getting better at hiding their resentment? Either way, we were only 3 months into a 10-year sentence. I had time to find out which it was. The slow burn was working exactly as planned. By month 6, the facade was crumbling completely. The surveillance footage told a story of 2 people being systematically broken down by the reality of sustained effort and genuine responsibility. Jessica had attempted to quit twice, only to be reminded by Patricia that leaving meant forfeiting the entire inheritance. She had also tried to hire outside help secretly, cleaning services, meal delivery, even a private nurse to assist with the more difficult residents. Each attempt was discovered and resulted in formal warnings that brought her closer to contract termination. David had developed a different strategy: emotional manipulation. I watched him try to bond with the residents, sharing sob stories about his difficult childhood and his mother's unexpected death. He was hoping to make them more sympathetic, less demanding. It backfired spectacularly. Eleanor Hartwell saw right through him during one of his performances. I had been in the recreation room, reading quietly in the corner, when David launched into his tale of woe while helping her with a jigsaw puzzle. "You know, Mrs. Hartwell, losing my mother so suddenly, it's been really hard on my family. Sometimes I wonder if she would be proud of the work we're doing here." Eleanor looked up from the puzzle piece she was examining. "Young man, in my 4 decades on the bench, I heard every sob story, every excuse, every attempt at emotional manipulation known to mankind. Do you know what I learned? David shook his head, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The people who truly care about others don't constantly talk about their own suffering. They just do what needs to be done. She placed her puzzle piece with precise movements. Now, if you're quite finished trying to make me feel sorry for you, I need assistance reaching that piece near your elbow. The conversation was over, but David's humiliation was complete. Word spread among the residents that David Benjamin was trying to work an angle, and they began treating both him and Jessica with polite but firm distance. The isolation was exactly what I had hoped for. But it was the financial pressure that truly began to destroy them. Living at the facility meant they had no real expenses, but they still owed money on credit cards they had maxed out before starting their employment. Jessica's sister had been calling constantly, demanding repayment of a loan, and David's business creditors were becoming increasingly aggressive. I watched Jessica take a phone call in her room one evening, unaware that every conversation was recorded. "Linda, please just give us more time," she pleaded with her sister. "The inheritance is guaranteed. We just have to complete the service requirement." 10 years, Jessica? 10 years of scrubbing floors and wiping butts? You could have been working regular jobs this whole time and earned more. It's $22 million, Linda. Even split, that's $11 million each. That's worth 10 years of anything. If you last 10 years, from what I can see, you're falling apart after 6 months. David looks like he's aged 10 years, and you, Jessica, when was the last time you looked in a mirror? Really looked? That night, Jessica did look in the mirror, and I watched her break down completely. The woman who had once spent hours on her appearance now saw someone with prematurely gray hair, rough hands, and the posture of someone carrying too much weight. Both physical and emotional. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: Tommy's boarding school. His grades had been declining since his parents started working at the facility. The once bright child who had whispered warnings to me in my kitchen was struggling academically and socially. His teachers reported that he seemed depressed and had stopped participating in activities he once enjoyed. David and Jessica received a call from the school counselor requesting a meeting. Because of their work schedule, they could only attend by video conference from Patricia's office, a conversation I was able to monitor completely. "Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin," the counselor began, "Tommy is showing signs of significant emotional distress. He's mentioned that his parents are prisoners somewhere and that he doesn't know when he'll see them again." Jessica's face crumpled. "We see him every weekend. For 2 hours, in a supervised setting that he describes as weird and sad. He's asked repeatedly when you're coming home, and he doesn't understand why you can't just use Grandma's money to be a family again." David cleared his throat. "It's complicated. We're fulfilling a legal obligation. Mr. Benjamin, with respect, Tommy doesn't understand legal obligations. He understands that his parents disappeared from his life and are now living somewhere he can't visit except under strange circumstances. He's 7 years old." The counselor continued, "We're recommending therapy for Tommy, but we also need to discuss whether this current arrangement is in his best interest. If you can't provide stability, don't you dare threaten to take our son," David snapped, and I saw a flash of the old entitlement return. "I'm not threatening anything. I'm trying to help a child who is clearly suffering." After the call ended, David and Jessica sat in Patricia's office in stunned silence. Finally, Jessica spoke. "Maybe we should quit. Maybe $22 million isn't worth losing our son." David was quiet for a long moment. "If we quit now, we get nothing." "Nothing, Jess. We'd still owe money to everyone. We'd have no house, no savings, no future. And Tommy would still be in boarding school because we couldn't afford anything else. So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying we stick it out. We make this work. We find a way to be better at this job, so it doesn't destroy us." Jessica laughed bitterly. Better at caring for people we resent? Better at pretending we want to be here? If that's what it takes. It was then that I realized something had shifted. They were no longer planning to endure their sentence. They were planning to game it. They thought they could learn to fake their way through 10 years, manipulating both the residents and the system for their own gain. They still didn't understand that this wasn't about endurance. This was about transformation. And if they wouldn't transform willingly, I would help them along. The next phase of my plan was about to begin. Month 9 brought the breaking point I had been waiting for. The surveillance footage from that Tuesday in July would be seared into my memory forever, not because of what happened, but because of what it revealed about the people I had once called family. It started with Mrs. Patricia Williams, one of our residents, having a medical emergency. The 83-year-old former CEO had suffered a stroke during lunch, collapsing while reaching for her water glass. In those crucial first moments, when every second mattered, I watched David and Jessica's true characters emerge. David's first instinct wasn't to help. It was to look around to see if anyone was watching. Jessica actually stepped backward, away from Mrs. Williams, as if the medical emergency was an inconvenience rather than a crisis. It was Colonel Theodore King, himself 79 years old, who immediately went to Mrs. Williams' side, checking her pulse and calling for help. Eleanor Hartwell, despite her arthritis, rushed to call 911. The other residents formed a protective circle around their fallen friend while David and Jessica stood frozen in self-preservation. "Don't just stand there," Eleanor barked at them. "Mrs. Williams needs help." Jessica finally moved, but only to complain. "I'm not trained for medical emergencies. We need real nurses for this." "You are the staff here," Colonel King growled, not looking up from Mrs. Williams. "This is exactly what you're trained for." David found his voice then. "Maybe we should call Patricia." "Maybe you should do your job," Eleanor snapped. I watched this scene unfold from my hidden position, my heart breaking for Mrs. Williams, but my resolve hardening like steel. Here was the moment of truth, when genuine care was required, not performed for an audience or a paycheck, and my son and daughter-in-law had failed completely. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but the damage was done. Every resident had witnessed David and Jessica's instinctive cowardice and self-interest. More importantly, they had revealed themselves to be exactly what I knew them to be, people who cared only about themselves. Mrs. Williams survived her stroke, but required intensive rehabilitation. Her departure from the facility left a hole in the community. She had been a voice of wisdom and kindness that the other residents deeply respected. At her bedside in the hospital, she asked to speak with me privately. I visited as Margaret Sinclair, the facility director, not knowing this conversation would change everything. "Margaret," she said in a voice weakened by her ordeal, "I need to tell you something about those 2 staff members." I leaned closer, already knowing what she would say. "They don't belong there. They're not caregivers. They're not even decent people." When I was lying on the floor, unable to speak or move, I could see them. They were calculating, not caring. They were worried about themselves, not about me. She gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I don't know why they're really there, but it's not to help people like us. They're dangerous, Margaret. Not violently, but spiritually dangerous. They make everyone around them feel less human." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I had created this elaborate revenge to teach David and Jessica about consequences, about the value of caring for others. But I had put innocent people at risk in the process. Mrs. Williams could have died because I had placed 2 fundamentally selfish people in charge of vulnerable lives. That night, I made a decision that would accelerate everything. I had been planning to let the full 10 years play out, to let David and Jessica slowly learn or fail to learn the lessons I wanted to teach them. But Mrs. Williams' stroke had shown me that some people simply cannot change, and my desire for poetic justice had put good people in danger. It was time to end this. I called Robert that night. I want to move up the timeline. What's happened? I told him about Mrs. Williams, about the medical emergency, about my growing certainty that David and Jessica were incapable of the transformation I had hoped for. They're not learning empathy, Robert. They're learning to hide their selfishness better. And in the meantime, people I've grown to care about are suffering. What do you want to do? I want to give them one final test. If they pass, they can have a portion of their inheritance and leave. If they fail... I paused, looking out at the facility where my son and daughter-in-law slept in their narrow beds, dreaming of money they would never see. If they fail, they lose everything, and the world learns exactly what kind of people they really are. What kind of test? I smiled, though it felt more like baring teeth. The kind that reveals everything. The next morning, I began putting the final phase of my plan into motion. Patricia received new instructions that would test David and Jessica in ways they couldn't possibly anticipate. The test would involve Tommy, it would involve their deepest fears, and it would strip away the last pretenses they had managed to maintain. Within 48 hours, I would know once and for all whether my son and daughter-in-law were capable of genuine love, or if they truly were the cold, calculating people they appeared to be. Either way, Martha Benjamin's story would finally reach its conclusion. The only question was whether it would end in redemption or complete destruction. The test I designed was devastatingly simple in its cruelty and perfect in its justice. I arranged for Tommy's boarding school to call with an emergency. As far as David and Jessica knew, their son had been in an accident and was in the hospital. The school needed one parent to come immediately, but the other had to remain at the facility due to critical staffing requirements, a fabrication I had Patricia deliver with perfect bureaucratic authority. I watched through the cameras as they received the news in Patricia's office. For the first time in 9 months, I saw genuine emotion on their faces, panic, fear, love for their child overriding their constant calculations. "I'll go," David said immediately. "I'll drive up right now." "No, I should go," Jessica countered. "You're better with the residents when they're having difficulties." It was almost touching until I heard the rest of their conversation. "Actually," David said, lowering his voice, "whoever stays should make sure nothing goes wrong here. If there's any kind of incident while one of us is away, they could use it to terminate our contract." Jessica nodded. "And we're so close to the 1-year mark. The bonuses kick in after year 1. Even with their child supposedly injured, they were still thinking about money, about gaming the system, about protecting their path to inheritance. "You go," Jessica decided. "I'll stay and make sure everything runs smoothly. But David, call me the second you know anything." I had arranged for the emergency to be a false alarm. Tommy was perfectly safe at school, though he didn't know his parents thought otherwise. David would drive 3 hours to discover his son was fine, supposedly the victim of mistaken identity. But the real test wasn't David's journey. It was what Jessica would do with the power of being alone. Within an hour of David's departure, Jessica revealed exactly who she was. I watched her go through the facility like a woman released from prison. She skipped the medication rounds for 3 residents, claiming they could wait until later. She served lunch late and with minimal portions, telling the residents that tightening belts never hurt anyone. Most damning of all, when Eleanor Hartwell requested help getting to the bathroom, a basic dignity issue for elderly residents, Jessica made her wait 45 minutes while she took a personal phone call. "I know this is a short-term situation," she told her sister on that call, "but I've figured out how to make it tolerable. You just have to remember that these people are being paid to be here. They're getting housing, food, medical care. All for free. They should be grateful for whatever attention they get." The residents noticed immediately. Colonel King, despite his age and physical limitations, began helping other residents with tasks Jessica was neglecting. Eleanor Hartwell, though she needed assistance herself, started checking on the more fragile residents to ensure they were receiving their medications on time. By afternoon, the situation had deteriorated to the point where the residents were essentially caring for each other while Jessica treated the facility like her personal vacation resort. That's when I made my final move. I walked into the main recreation room wearing my best clothes and carrying official-looking papers. To the residents, I was Margaret Sinclair, the facility benefactor making an unexpected inspection. To Jessica, I was someone whose opinion could destroy her future. "Good afternoon, everyone," I announced. "I'm here for a surprise evaluation of our care standards." Jessica appeared within seconds, her face flushed with panic. "Miss Sinclair, I wasn't expecting. We weren't notified." "Surprise evaluations are meant to show how the facility operates under normal conditions," I said coolly. "I trust there won't be any problems." What followed was 3 hours of devastating exposure. I asked residents about their care, their comfort, their treatment by staff. Every answer revealed Jessica's negligence, her selfishness, her fundamental inability to care for anyone but herself. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I said to one of our most vulnerable residents, "have you received all your medications today?" "Well," Mrs. Rodriguez said uncertainly. "The nice lady said some of them could wait until later." She seemed very busy. "Mr. Patterson, have you been assisted with your physical therapy exercises?" I asked, but she said her back was hurting and maybe tomorrow would be better. With each question, Jessica's face grew paler. She tried to interrupt, to explain, to make excuses, but I continued my methodical destruction of her pretenses. Finally, I turned to Eleanor Hartwell. "Mrs. Hartwell, how would you rate the care you've received today?" Eleanor looked directly at Jessica, then back at me. "I've received better care from the other residents than from the person paid to provide it." The silence that followed was deafening. "I see," I said, making notes on my clipboard. "Miss Benjamin, could I speak with you privately?" We walked to Patricia's office, Jessica practically trembling with fear. Once the door closed, she broke down completely. "Please, Miss Sinclair, you have to understand. My husband is dealing with a family emergency. I'm handling everything alone. I'm doing the best I can." "Are you?" I asked quietly.
Yes.
"I mean, I know today wasn't perfect, but—" "Miss Benjamin, let me ask you something. If your son were living in this facility, receiving the level of care you provided today, how would you feel?" She stared at me, and for a moment, I thought she might actually understand. Then she said the words that sealed her fate. "But Tommy isn't here. These people are different. They're just residents." Just residents. Just human beings whose lives had been reduced to inconveniences in her mind. I smiled then, and something in my expression made her step backward. "Miss Benjamin, I need to tell you something important. The emergency with your son was fabricated. He's perfectly safe at school."
What?
"But why would you?" "Because I needed to see who you really are when you think no one is watching. And now I know." I pulled out my phone and played a recording of her conversation with her sister, the one where she called the residents people being paid to be here, who should be grateful for whatever attention they get. Jessica's face went white. "You can't. That's private. You can't record." "Actually, I can. It's clearly stated in your employment contract that all communications on facility property are subject to monitoring. You signed that contract, Miss Benjamin." "Please," she whispered. "Please don't fire me. We need this job. We need the inheritance. I'll do better, I promise." "You don't understand," I said, standing up from the desk. "I'm not here to fire you. I'm here to tell you the truth." I reached into my purse and pulled out my identification, my real identification. "My name isn't Margaret Sinclair," I said, watching her face as recognition slowly dawned. "My name is Martha Benjamin, and I'm very much alive." Jessica's knees gave out, and she collapsed into a chair. "Surprised to see me?"
I asked.
You shouldn't be. After all, you're living in my house. The look on Jessica's face when she realized who I was will sustain me for the rest of my life. The color drained from her skin so completely that I worried she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and her hands shook so violently she had to grip the arms of her chair to steady herself. You're dead, she whispered. We went to your funeral. We saw your casket. You saw a performance, I corrected. A very expensive, very convincing performance designed to reveal your true nature. And my dear Jessica, you have exceeded even my worst expectations. The full weight of her situation was beginning to dawn on her. The inheritance, the trust, the money was never really yours to begin with. The trust was real, but it was designed to accomplish exactly what it has, to show the world who you and my son really are. I walked to the window and looked out at the facility grounds where residents were enjoying the afternoon sunshine. Several were reading, others playing cards, all of them living with dignity in a place I had created specifically to torture David and Jessica. For 9 months, I've watched you both, I continued. I've seen every moment of selfishness, every complaint, every time you've treated vulnerable human beings like burdens instead of people deserving of care and respect. Jessica found her voice. You've been watching us? How? This entire facility is mine, Jessica. Every camera, every microphone, every staff member, they all answer to me. I've been living upstairs this entire time, watching my son and daughter-in-law reveal themselves to be exactly as heartless as I suspected. She tried to stand, swayed, and sat back down heavily. Does David know? David will learn shortly. He's on his way back from his wild goose chase to Tommy's school, where he'll discover his son is perfectly fine and was never in danger. Just like I was never in danger when you tried to ship me off to a nursing home. The irony hung in the air between us like smoke. Tommy, Jessica said suddenly. Where is Tommy? Safe. Being cared for by people who actually love him while his parents have been learning what real work feels like. I turned back to face her. Did you really think I would abandon my grandson to your questionable parenting indefinitely? We weren't bad parents. Weren't you? You shipped him off to boarding school the moment you thought you had access to money. You saw him for 2 hours a week and spent most of that time complaining about how tired you were. You treated him like an obligation rather than a gift. Jessica's face crumpled, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw what might have been genuine remorse. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I know we made mistakes, but Martha, Mom, please, we can fix this. We can be better. Can you? Can you really, Jessica? Because I gave you 9 months to show me who you could become when faced with real responsibility, real consequences. And instead of rising to the occasion, you've shown me that you're even worse than I imagined. I sat down across from her, the woman who had helped orchestrate my exile from my own home. Today, when you thought no one was watching, you neglected medications for elderly residents. You made Eleanor Hartwell wait 45 minutes for assistance getting to the bathroom. Do you understand what that does to a person's dignity? You called human beings just residents as if their worth was somehow less than yours. I was overwhelmed. You were revealed. I cut her off. Mrs. Williams could have died because of your negligence and David's cowardice. I put vulnerable people at risk to teach you a lesson, and you've proven that you're unteachable. The door opened, and David walked in, his face flushed from the rushed drive. Jess, how's Tommy? The school said it was all a mistake, that he stopped when he saw me sitting there. I watched recognition hit him like a physical blow. His face went through the same transformation as Jessica's, confusion, disbelief, then dawning horror. Hello, David, I said calmly. Surprised to see your mother alive and well? He looked between Jessica and me, then slowly sank into the remaining chair. I don't understand. How are you? Why are you? Alive? Here? Watching you destroy your lives for money that was never really yours? I laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. I'm here because you try to throw me away like garbage. Because you thought I was a burden you could dispose of without consequences. Mom, we never. Don't lie to me, David. I heard you. I heard both of you discussing how to get rid of me, how to access my money, how much easier your lives would be without me around. I leaned forward. Did you really think I would just disappear quietly and leave my fortune to two people who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience? The silence stretched between us, filled with 9 months of accumulated sins and revelations. The money, David said finally, the 22 million, is mine. It's always been mine, and it will never, ever be yours. I stood up and walked to the window again. I built this facility specifically for you, a beautiful cage where you could learn what it means to serve others instead of serving only yourselves. I gave you 9 months to show me you were capable of growth, of empathy, of becoming decent human beings. And we failed, Jessica said quietly. Spectacularly. I turned back to them. Mrs. Williams could have died because of your selfishness. Tommy has been struggling in school because you abandoned him. The residents here have been caring for each other because you've been too busy feeling sorry for yourselves to do your jobs properly. I pulled out my phone and showed them the recording I had made of Jessica's conversation with her sister. As they listened to her dismissive words about the residents, I watched David's face change. Even he, selfish as he was, seemed shocked by his wife's callousness. You recorded us? He asked. I documented you. Every conversation, every moment of negligence, every time you chose yourselves over the people you were paid to care for. I put the phone away. Tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in Charleston will receive a full report on your performance here, along with complete financial records showing how you spent your inheritance before you even had it. Jessica gasped. You can't do that. Our reputations. Your reputations are built on lies anyway. I'm simply revealing the truth. What about Tommy? David asked, and for the first time, I heard genuine concern in his voice. Tommy will be fine. Better than fine, actually. I've established a trust fund for his education and future, one that you can never touch. He'll be raised by people who see him as a blessing, not a burden. You can't take our son, Jessica said, standing up unsteadily. I'm not taking him. You gave him up when you chose money over family. You gave him up when you shipped him to boarding school so you could focus on your inheritance. You gave him up every time you treated him like an obligation rather than a gift. I walked to the door, then turned back for one final look at the two people who had once been my family. You wanted to put me in a home, I said. Instead, you ended up in mine. You thought you could throw me away and profit from it. Instead, you've lost everything. Your son, your future, your dignity. David found his voice one last time. What happens to us now? I smiled, and I knew it wasn't a kind expression.
Now?
Now you get to live with the consequences of your choices. You're unemployed, in debt, and about to be publicly humiliated. You have no money, no home, and no family who wants anything to do with you. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. But don't worry. I'm sure you'll figure something out. After all, you're both so good at taking care of yourselves. I'm writing this from my cottage in Beaufort, where Margaret Sinclair has become a permanent resident. The morning sun streams through my windows as I tend to my garden, and I can hear Tommy laughing in the backyard where he's building a fort with the help of my neighbors. The news coverage of David and Jessica's situation was everything I had hoped for. Their story became a cautionary tale about greed and elder abuse, picked up by national media and discussed on talk shows. They became the poster children for entitled children who exploit their aging parents. David found work at a fast food restaurant 2 towns over, the only employer who would hire him after the publicity. Jessica works as a night shift cleaner at an office building. They live in a one-bedroom apartment and, according to my sources, barely speak to each other. They lost custody of Tommy not because I fought for it, but because they couldn't afford to care for him and had no stable home to offer. The courts awarded custody to my sister Elizabeth, who had always been a loving presence in Tommy's life. Tommy visits me every weekend now, and we're rebuilding our relationship slowly. He doesn't fully understand what happened between his parents and me, but he knows he's safe and loved. That's enough for now. The residents of Restful Acres have all been relocated to excellent facilities with my support. Mrs. Williams made a full recovery and sends me holiday cards. Eleanor Hartwell writes to me regularly, sharing her thoughts on justice and redemption. Colonel King visits monthly to play chess and tell war stories. As for me, I'm healthier and happier than I've been in years. Margaret Sinclair is everything Martha Benjamin never had the freedom to be: independent, uncompromising, and completely in control of her own destiny. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about what I did to David and Jessica. The answer is simple. I gave them exactly what they deserved. They wanted to discard me like trash, so I let them learn what it feels like to be discarded. They wanted my money without earning it, so I made them work harder than they ever had in their lives. They thought they were sending me to a home. Instead, they ended up living in mine under my rules, subject to my judgment. They thought they were getting rid of me. They had no idea they were just getting started with me. And in the end, I got exactly what I wanted: the last laugh. Thank you for joining me on Martha's incredible journey of justice and redemption. If this story moved you, please share it with others who believe in the power of consequences. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories of people who refused to be victims and found their own unique paths to justice. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update, and let me know in the comments. Do you think Martha went too far, or did David and Jessica get exactly what they deserved? Your thoughts and shares help these stories reach people who need to hear them. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply being better than those who tried to bring you down.